Welcome to the ONS Energy Talks. My name is Anne Ekern, and it's my pleasure to host today's talk. Innovation and new technologies are keys to driving the world of energy forward. Shell is one of the companies investing in entrepreneurship, new ventures, and early-stage companies. What technologies are energy companies currently looking for? And what willingness and means are available for these kind of investments today? Our guest at today's Energy Talk, Kirk Coburn, is the investment director with Shell Ventures. Kirk has a background as an energy entrepreneur. He's a startup advocate with a dedication to innovation and building winning companies and teams. It's a pleasure to have you, Kirk.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you.
So I have to ask you first, you're based in Houston. So how are you doing there? And what is the situation like at the moment?
Actually, things are getting back to normal. I've actually relocated to a place called Nantucket, which is an island off of Cape Cod. So I'm closer probably to you almost than I am to Houston. So things are great right now.
Okay, good. So from your perspective, what are the key specific technologies and areas of interest to energy corporate venture capital and for Shell in particular?
Great. Thanks for asking that question. So we actually have two sort of primary areas to focus on. One is our oil and gas business. How do we make our existing operations more sustainable? How do we reduce costs? So we still have an oil and gas focused mandate. And then we have a large mandate to go after the energy transition. And when we think about the energy transition, we really put it in two buckets. One is sort of this power business. So it's the generation of renewable power, it's the transmission, distribution, it's the trading of that power, as well as serving customers on the retail side. So the power business, and then we have what we call mobility. So, the fact that customers are changing not only what they drive, but really, even with this sort of COVID-19 situation, where people are working, how they're working. And so we think about mobility as well, not only from a fuel source, but also location perspective.
That's interesting. So when you are looking, from your perspective, what characterizes an attractive investment? Are you looking for small companies with great ideas? What are you looking for?
Yes, so great. Shell overall and Shell Ventures is we sort of believe in an and approach. So we have an incredible group of scientists and engineers that develop technology internally. However, we realize that much of the innovation is coming from awesome entrepreneurs out there. And so we really love to combine the two. So how do we find entrepreneurs that are solving a big problem that we think is in our space? So we look for entrepreneurs solving energy problems. And so we really have sort of two objectives. One is it relevant for Shell? Is it in our future ambition? Do we think that this company or technology could really help us in the future? So we really think about it from a customer point of view, as well as from an investor point of view. Is do we think this technology and this team can build a really good business that, we can make potentially together make a good return on?
Great. So that kind of brings me to the next question. Could you tell us a bit when you invest in companies and make investments within this area? What kind of role does Shell play? And what's your contribution to creating that great win-win?
Right. Excellent. One of the things that's really interesting about corporate venture capital, and in my time having been spent at Shell, is the fact that we have so many different ways that we help portfolio companies. The first is, we give them potentially cash. So we invest into their company, they need that cash to grow. So that's just one lever, and that's what, most investors in general provide. The other piece that I think is really interesting and something that I think we do a really good job is thinking about it from a customer point of view. Not only do we have incredible scientists, engineers, and experts on helping our portfolio companies build a better business, but also we think about it from a customer. So we hire these companies and we deploy that technology internally to Shell. So not only does that help that company because we provide revenue to them, so which is non-dilutive funding in many ways, and secondly, we provide a large customer base where they learn how to serve a really big customer, and they learn how to actually land more customers because of the help that we give them. So we provide a range of services that I think is ultimately really compelling.
So to what extent can actually these companies make changes to the operation and the functioning of Shell, and to what extent maybe some of them have done so already?
Yeah, a great example is we invested in a company in Norway called Corvis Energy, which is the leading energy storage supplier for the maritime space. And Shell has a long history of being a shipping and maritime company, and we also operate assets offshore, not only oil and gas assets, but as well as new energy assets like wind. And Corvis, what they do is they are decarbonizing the offshore supply vessels that go back and forth between these assets and shore. And so they actually put batteries on these offshore vessels and hybridize, reducing fuel costs, reducing emissions. So it's a win-win, and we're deploying Corvis technology today and on a few of our assets now.
So do you think with the COVID, do you think we will see more or less innovation and entrepreneurship coming out of this situation, given the demand and price collapse? And can the startups out there expect there to be as much capital as we were predicting, say, in December 2019?
Sure. I mean, great question. It's interesting. I really, since this time, I sort of went back in time and sort of did a look back of what are the technologies and is there a correlation between technology and adoption of that technology? And what I found, and so this really kind of goes into what I think is going to happen now, is that in the sort of the mid 80s, 82 to 87, you saw 3D seismic not only be invented, but it really became adopted. And so what are there's sort of three big themes that you have to look for. One is there's a technology innovation. So in the 80s, it was 3D seismic. Secondly, you have volatility of oil prices. And third, you have low oil prices. And what we saw in this sort of 82 to 87, you saw, oil almost at $100, drop to sort of the $30 range, but there was a lot of volatility within that. Well, during that timeline, you saw Landmark Graphics was incorporated and started getting adoption. You saw SMT Kingdom, and you saw Paradigm. So three of the sort of the top 3D seismic companies were invented and started deploying technology during that time. We saw a similar thing happen in the 90s, 96 to 2000, when really digital infrastructure came into play. So the technology was sort of this new digital infrastructure layer with the internet was getting started. And what companies were, invented and started deploying technology? You saw C3, P2, Tibco, Petrel, PetroWeb, RigNet, Inverness. You saw many sort of digital focused companies really not only become started, but also gaining strides. And then lately in the 2000 sort of 13, 14 range, you saw cloud and mobile. Now, during all these periods I just talked about, you also had these sort of very volatile oil prices and then low oil prices. So, and during sort of 2013, 14, which is actually not too far back, you saw companies like Parsable and RigUp and others get started that gained quite a bit of traction and adoption. So we're at the very beginning stages of COVID-19 and what's going to happen. But what we're seeing is we're seeing volatile oil prices and low oil prices. And we now have sort of this digital technology layer, which has been brought about by cloud and mobile. I believe there's going to be a whole bunch of innovation happening, and we're excited to be in the middle of it.
It's really interesting. And on a more personal level, we've all changed the ways we work. What's been your experience with that, personally and in the context of Shell? Do you feel you've been productive? Because most people say it's worked pretty well.
I mean, amazing. We all talked about how you have to get on airplanes to see people, which I still believe is very important, especially when doing diligence company. There's some people you just don't know. However, our team has learned that we can be quite successful working remotely. I tend to really enjoy the remote working as long as I can see and speak to my colleagues. But overall, we found it to be quite easier than we expected.
So looking now in this near-term COVID picture, to what extent, if at all, have you seen that this has affected the energy companies' willingness and interest in investing in venture and early stage companies?
Well, I think it hasn't really changed our focus on any level about investing into startups and finding entrepreneurs that have better ways of moving the energy transition forward and moving our business forward. So for us, it definitely heightens our sense of urgency to find the best technologies and the best entrepreneurs and teams that can help us do that. So in many ways, I would say it just made us more aware and even have a bigger sense of urgency.
Great. So you worked with entrepreneurship outside of the energy business as well. So I was curious,
Right.
Comparing, and looking at the energy industry, would you say that it's forward-leaning and very willing to change, or would you put it in more the other end and say maybe it's an industry a bit more reluctant, maybe even slow to change? Where would you? And I'm sure there's a big variation between companies as well, but if you were to generalize.
I think in general, when you think about oil and gas, oil and gas industry has been incredibly innovative since the beginning. I mean, they really drove the mass adoption of high computing power in the beginning, in the early 80s, but in the 70s, and then in the 80s. So I think, and also when you think about sort of what has happened with horizontal drilling, and there's been some great innovation. So I would say on one side you see a massive, energy industry is always sort of on the edge of new technology. On the same side, I'd say, adoption of technology in oil and gas has been very difficult, especially for digital. It takes time. And from my analysis, it takes volatility and low oil prices to increase adoption time. So I think, this industry is very complicated, so it's not as easy as other industries per se to just roll out new technology. So I think it's, in some ways, I look at it on two levels: extremely innovative and in some cases laggards, but that laggard, there's a reason why. And I think, it has its reasons.
So you have colleagues sitting around the world, I believe. So you're looking for opportunities in other areas other than the US as well. Are there big geographical and or cultural differences in terms of the dedication and ability to find new solutions? Are some more innovative than others?
Great question. I mean, before I joined Shell, I ran and started an accelerator that focused on energy called Surge, and we invested in companies all over the world. And now that I'm at Shell, I can tell you that what I have found is entrepreneurship is alive and well in almost every part of the world. And it's very difficult there are areas of the world where there's expertise. One of the areas that we see in, for instance, Norway, Bergen, there's a lot of expertise coming around from sort of subsurface technology, which makes sense. But when you think about innovation on technologies in general around the world, it's really hard to pinpoint where it's going to come, especially on energy transition, on new energy technologies. They come everywhere. And we've made investments, even while I was at Surge, we've made investments everywhere, from Italy to San Francisco, to Canada to Chile. I mean, it's really, you can't count out any section of the world because entrepreneurship, I think, is embedded in just about everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I sense that you're a technology optimist, if that's a term. Are you and some people also say, that crisis, and we kind of touched on it, that crisis, they stimulate, smarter solutions, people being innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you get forced to being innovative because whether you're cutting costs. Now we have, climate challenges as well. Are you as optimistic as if I'd asked you the same question a year ago? Or more optimistic, maybe?
I think I'm more optimistic. I think what there's been some big trends that, from my personal investment thesis, and now that it's Shell, I think I have a much better view of of sort of the industry. But you have this sort of some big themes. You have digital that's just being deployed, and when I say digital, I'm saying like sort of cloud computing and mobile. So employees can work anywhere and almost do anything on their own device, as well as cloud, the ability to roll out technology globally simply. Those things, that's not going away, and that's starting to be deployed within the industry on a massive scale. At the same time, you also have this great generational crew change where millennials are really starting to come into their own. We've been betting on sort of that crew change, not Shell, but I've been sort of looking at this for 10 years. It's sort of been a conversation for 20 years. But I think now with sort of this low oil prices and volatility, you're going to see more baby boomers retiring and more millennials get promoted. And I think that is very important because millennials were born almost with Facebook as a norm and social media as a norm. So the way they think about technology is very different. You also have this, urgency to accelerate the energy transition, which I think is not going away. And you have those sort of three big trends that, to me, I'm even more optimistic about, seeing leaders, seeing companies adopt new technology. So to me, it's accelerating.
So you're on, when we've spoken to different people in these energy talks, some are saying that they think the COVID situation will speed up the energy transition, and some people say will slow it down. But I gather you're then more in the optimistic end of all of that.
I believe the data supports that, and personally, I think it's happening based on what I'm seeing, on a kind of small scale, but also on a larger scale. I think, as we spoke earlier about sort of eras of adoption, especially in oil and gas, I think you're seeing sort of this is a new era of adoption because you got volatility, you have sort of low oil prices, you have technology that is better, that is ready, and that's been proven. And I think you're going to see an adoption cycle that's going to increase. I think there's been a lot of technologies waiting that have not been adopted yet, but I think now you have a great opportunity.
Great. COVID has shown that governmental intervention has been critical. So I was just kind of curious in the context of what you're doing. Do you think, looking into the glass bowl, do you think you'll work closer maybe with government, or do you think they will play a more instrumental role in, through policy and in helping, drive new technology?
Great question. I can't speak to ultimately, where how government's going to be interactive because it's so regional and local based. However, what I can say, and this has always sort of been a universal theme, is that as industries grow and they evolve, there's really three parties at the table for any industry, and that is you have businesses or entrepreneurs that are creating new ideas and technologies. You have customers, consumers that are actually buying those technologies, and they have to actually buy a new technology. And a great example of that is there's a bunch of plastic waste around the world, and that can be actually converted into more products, which is what we call the circular economy. Well, you also need government interaction as well. So I think you need regulation and legislation. You need consumers to participate, and you also need business. And I think with those three, you need all three parties at the table to make anything happen. And so to me, it's hard to bet for government or against government. What we do is work with government, and I don't directly work with government. I work with startups, and they're very savvy around, and that's usually one of the reasons that technology gets adopted into any industry is when there's been a legislation or regulation change. You see new businesses pop up. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens in the future. I definitely, if I knew what's going to happen in the future, I'd be probably much more important than I am today. But that's definitely a great question.
I think, from what I hear, we can be optimistic about a smarter future. We can all play a role in making that happen. And governments, companies, individuals, everyone. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up a very interesting conversation. Do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
I appreciate it. You inviting me on the show, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for a great conversation. And thanks to all of you for watching ONS Energy Talk. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Cheers.